Welcome to Learn the Word, the daily Bible teaching program of Calvary Chapel of Delta and Pastor Doug McLean. Although Saul doubted David's ability in fighting Goliath, David didn't doubt the Lord's ability. Let's take a look at how David responded in 1 Samuel chapter 17 and verse 34.
Verse 34, but David said to Saul, your servant used to keep his father's sheep, and when a lion or bear came and took a lamb out of the flock, I went after it and struck it and delivered the lamb from its mouth. And when it arose against me, I caught it by its beard and struck it and killed it. Your servant has killed both lion and bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, seeing he has defied the armies of the living God. Moreover, David said, the Lord who delivered me. I have that underlined in my Bible. The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and the Lord be with you. So David had experience dealing with deadly and dangerous adversaries while he was alone with the sheep. He was victorious. He recounted over a lion and over a bear. He saved a lamb from a lion. So this was not the first time he faced danger and experienced victory. So his private battles and experience with the Lord had prepared him to face this public challenge. And he had the right perspective. He's looking at this, seeing the Lord's ability. And he measured that situation not based on his own ability or his own experience. He measured it based on the Lord's ability and the Lord's faithfulness, because David recognized the Lord in the situation. David saw the Lord. He saw Goliath as just a man challenging God, but he saw the Lord. He saw Goliath as just another beast to defeat. So Saul was moved by David's conviction, gave him permission to go, and then he tried to help David. Verse 38, so Saul clothed David with his armor, and he put a bronze helmet on his head. He also clothed him with a coat of mail. David fastened his sword to his armor and tried to walk, for he had not tested them. And David said to Saul, I cannot walk with these, for I have not tested them. So David took them off. So Saul put armor on David that he wasn't willing to wear himself to face the giant. And interesting, it's a smaller version of what Goliath had on. And David just puts it on, says, I've never worn armor like this. I don't know how to walk in it, let alone fight in it, so I'll skip the armor. Not a good occasion to try something new. Verse 40, then he took his staff in his hand, and he chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook. Please underline that. It's a detail we can read through quickly. From the brook, and put them in a shepherd's bag in a pouch which he had, and his sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. So this is significant. He grabbed the stones from the brook. The brook is in the middle of the valley of Elah, which means you have Israel on one ridge, you have the Philistines on the other ridge. The giant was coming down to the valley. David, when he gets the okay to go, goes down into the valley, halfway across the valley to get his stones, which means he was going to face the giant without any ammo. He didn't get it until he got to the brook. And these stones, just so you know, could have been the size of a tennis ball, not a little tiny stone, but a big stone. The sling, a leather pouch, 2 straps on it. They put the big stone in it and whirl it around, and just at the right time, release one of the straps, and the stone would go flying. Some experts say over 100 miles an hour. That's what we're dealing with. So he drew near to Goliath, and verse 41 says, so the Philistine came and began drawing near to David, and the man who bore the shield went before him. Oh, wait a minute. Wasn't it supposed to be one-on-one? That liar. It's not one-on-one. Verse 42, and when the Philistines looked around and saw David, he disdained him, for he was only a youth, ruddy and good-looking. So the Philistines said to David, am I a dog that you come to meet me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said to David, come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and to the beasts of the field. Goliath insulted that David came. He saw David as a boy. He saw the staff in the hand, but that's it. You're coming at me with sticks. See, Goliath's expecting close combat. And so he was confident, boasting in his gods, cursing David. David responded, verse 45, David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." David didn't have the weapons that Goliath had, didn't have conventional weapons, but he had this knowledge that he was coming in the name of the Lord God of the armies of Israel. He was coming as a representative of God. He was coming on behalf of God. He was coming for the Lord into this battle. He came for the Lord's reputation. He's saying, you have the weapons, but I have the Lord. Verse 46, he continued, "This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you and take your head from you. And this day I will give the carcasses of the camp of Philistines to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the earth for two reasons. Number one, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. Number two, then all of this assembly shall know that the Lord does not save with sword or spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands." So David was out to deliver a message. Actually, two messages. Number one, the first message, he wanted everyone on earth to know and to see the power of his God. That there's a God in Israel and he's powerful. He wanted all the earth to see that the God of Israel is supreme. And the second reason, he wanted everyone there, the Philistines and the Israelites, to see that God doesn't need human strength or human weapons to win a battle. That God isn't dependent on our abilities, our experience, our resources to win a battle, but he can win battles. So David, confident in the Lord, verse 48, so it was when the Philistine arose and came and drew near to meet David, that David hurried and ran towards the army to meet the Philistine. Then David put his hand in his bag and took out a stone and slung it and struck the Philistine in his forehead, so that the stone sank into his forehead and he fell on his face to the earth. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone and struck the Philistine and killed him, but there was no sword in the hand of David. So a few things, details to note. We're told that the Philistine arose, which means that Goliath must have taken a seat while David was talking. That's how arrogant, cocky, confident he was, because we're told that when David came near, then he stood up and he went towards David. He wasn't taking David seriously at all. But David didn't wait. He ran towards the enemy. He proclaimed it was the Lord's battle, and he participated. He didn't just say, well, the Lord's going to handle it. It's the Lord's battle. Let's just sit back here and pray about it, which is a good thing. But he said, I'm going to be involved. And he ran towards the battle. He executed the Lord's judgment against this blasphemous giant. And understand that's what it was. Because in the land of Israel, there was a law against blasphemy. And the penalty for blasphemy was stoning. David went out and executed the Lord's judgment against this giant. Now, Goliath was laying there, not moving. Put yourself in the place of the Philistines or in the sandals of an Israelite and think about what you're thinking as David slings a stone at the giant. You're up on a hill. You watch the giant fall over. So if I were a Philistine, I would be saying, that's just the first blow, caught him off guard, hit him in the head. He's going to stand back up and take out this little twerp. If I were an Israelite and I saw David going to Goliath, I would be saying, David, he might not be dead. Be careful, David. They were unsure of his status. Verse 51, therefore David ran and stood over the Philistine, took his sword, drew it out of his sheath, and killed him, and cut off his head with it. And when the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. So David wanted to end all doubt. He wanted to make sure he was dead, so he took Goliath's sword and killed him again. Cut off his head, wanted everyone to be absolutely sure that Goliath wasn't getting up again. So Goliath ends up beheaded like Dagon. Do you remember that back in 1 Samuel chapter 5 when the children of Israel lost the ark to the Philistines, and the Philistines took the ark of God, the ark of the covenant, into their temple, the temple of Dagon, and they left it there, and they came back the next day, and the idol of Dagon was fallen over. and they stood it back up. And the next day they came in and they found it fallen over again, but the head was broken off. Same thing here happening to Goliath. His head removed from his body, judged by the living God. And David's actions then inspired others. Look at verse 52. Now the men of Israel and Judah arose and shouted and pursued the Philistines as far as the entrance of the valley into the gates of Ekron. And the wounded of the Philistines fell along the road to Sha'arim, as far as Gath and Ekron. Then the children of Israel returned from chasing the Philistines, and they plundered their tents. So everyone got involved. When they saw David's victory over the giant, everyone was inspired to get involved. And everyone got involved, not because David was guilting everybody or pressuring everybody or campaigning to everybody to get involved, but everyone got involved because one young man had a cause. And he personally stepped forward in faith and fulfilled that purpose. And as the Lord used him, that motivated everyone else to join in. Verse 54, and David took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his armor in his tent. So remember, this guy's taller than this, and his head must have been big. So this is a two-handed head carry. And I don't know if he had him from the hair or if he had him from the beard or both. Either way, it was pretty gross. And here comes David carrying the head of Goliath, and he decides to go to Jerusalem, which is interesting because at this point in time, Jerusalem was a Jebusite city. David wouldn't conquer Jerusalem for years to come. So as David went through this Jebusite city, he was saying something. He was saying something. Verse 55, when Saul saw David going out against the Philistine, he said to Abner, the commander of his army, Abner, whose son is this youth? And Abner said, as your soul lives, O king, I do not know. So the king said, inquire whose son this young man is. Then as David returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul, again with the head of the Philistine in his hand. And Saul said to him, whose son are you, young man? So David said, I am the son of your servant Jesse the Bethlehemite. So this shows us that David was not significant to Saul or to Abner until after this event. Until this point in time, he was just a musician. He was a young man that would come and play and calm Saul's nerves. But Saul couldn't remember any significant details about him. He didn't know who his father was. He didn't know anything about his family. So here he decides to ask, as David stood there holding Goliath's head. And we'll see that he becomes very interested in David. He becomes very consumed with David. He becomes very focused on David, not because he likes David at all. But we'll see in the next chapter, he becomes very insecure and envious and concerned that David would be a threat to his kingdom, even though David gave no evidence except absolute loyalty. Saul is just so consumed with envy and insecurity that he attempts to murder David on several occasions. And so that's how the story develops. Now, in looking at this very familiar story, there are several lessons for us. Obviously, in looking at this, we know we're not in Israel, we're not in the land of promise, and we are not the people of Israel. We are not battling Philistines. We're not facing literal giants. But we are in a battle. We're in a battle. We do have enemies. And there are certainly some giants, some adversaries that end up in our lives that are huge and formidable, scary. There are foes that we face. And there are some foes that we all face, and there are other foes that are very specific in your life. There are these enemies that come and taunt and threaten and challenge us, enemies that inspire fear, that seek to intimidate us. If you just think about the general enemies that we face, we know, for example, that certainly the devil and his demons are against us. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12 tells us that. Ephesians 6:12 says, for we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in heavenly places. There's a very real devil who seeks to engage us, to attack our flesh, to attack our fallen humanity, who is absolutely opposed to us as God's people. He is our adversary. And he particularly targets our flesh And our own flesh can be a formidable foe as well. Paul wrote about it in Galatians chapter 5, verse 17. He said, the flesh lusts against the spirit and the spirit against the flesh, and these things are contrary to one another, so that you do not do the things that you wish. In other words, the fleshly man, the natural man, the person that you were born, how you were born, your first birth, is opposed by nature to the Lord and to the Spirit and to spiritual things. And there's this battle that goes on within each of us. And that old man is particularly attached to and captivated by and vulnerable to the things of this world. There's a world system that is very much in opposition to the Lord. 1 John chapter 2, verse 16. 1 John 2:16, all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life is not of the Father, but is of the world. And there are these things in the world that captivate, that distract, that ensnare us, that want to take us down the wrong path. See, there's adversaries that we all face. There are giants that are before us, and they shout, and they question, and they challenge. They bring temptations, enticements, doubt, fear, discouragement, seeking to paralyze us. These enemies want us to be living like there is no victory, that we're just camped on a hill somewhere. The devil is out to silence our witness, to get us to do nothing, to have no impact. To be silent just like the rest of the world, and perhaps maybe just waiting for somebody to show up, somebody else to do the work, somebody we can pay to deal with the giants. The devil just wants us to sit paralyzed, doing nothing. And that's the way it was when David showed up. No one was willing to stand and face the giant. Over 40 days, they had come to accept the status quo. And they were upset when David challenged it. When David challenged the status quo, nothing was happening. Nothing was happening. And so I had offered to pay somebody to deal with the Philistines, while everyone else just sat there in fear, in essentially practical defeat. But David came. One young man, David came, and he saw things aren't right. Things aren't right. He saw that no one was doing anything about the situation, and he started to ask questions. He said, is there not a cause? Is there not a cause? And then his own brother opposed him. And it will happen to you if you begin to question the status quo. The people who are closest to you may even try to silence you. But David saw there was a cause. David saw there was a reason to stand up. He wanted everyone in Israel to know that there's a God in Israel, and he's able to save without our abilities, without our resources, without our experience, without our weaponry. And David was out to defend the Lord's reputation, to show the world who the Lord is. And he was out for the glory of God. That was his cause. Everyone saw the problem. It looks like God isn't getting the glory. It looks like there isn't a living God. It looks like God's doing nothing. It looks like the enemy's winning. But no one was willing to stand up except David. And listen, please, David was not some superhero without any fear. Later on, he wrote in Psalm 34, verse 4, Psalm 34, 4, he said, I sought the Lord and he heard me and he delivered me from all my fears. See, David had fears. Like Paul. You read Paul, look at Paul's life in the book of Acts and you think, man, that guy is fearless. And yet later when he wrote to the church in Corinth, he wrote in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 3, he said, I was with you in weakness and in fear and in much trembling. See, David had fears, but his fears didn't have him. And he didn't let the fear control. He stood up because he saw the Lord's battle. It wasn't his battle. He saw the Lord's battle. Do you see the Lord's battle? Not your battle, his battle. And do you look and see the devil opposing the Lord? Do you see the things in the world that are opposing to the Lord? You see, if you see the Lord's battle, then that's an opportunity like David to stand up and do something, to have a cause. Do you have a cause? Is there a reason that you get up every morning? Is there a reason that you do what you do? What is your cause? You are put here for a purpose. And the purpose has way more to do with the Lord than it does just with your likes, your dislikes, your goals. Do you have a cause? Do you have a reason to get up in the morning for the Lord? And when you see a cause, when you see the battle the Lord's put before you, the experts are going to show up and tell you it's not possible. What do you have? What can you do? You don't have money. You don't have resources. You don't have skill. You don't have experience. You're too young. You don't have the right degrees. You don't have the right connections. And the experts are always there to give you all the reasons to sit out the battle. Just stay where you are. Just do nothing because you're not qualified. And then there will be others that will show up and they'll offer to help. They'll give you counsel and support and suggestions that are worldly, that aren't from the Lord. They'll point you to models of the worldly ways. And they'll try to essentially get you to wear somebody else's armor. But 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 3 tells us, 2 Corinthians 10, 3 and 4, for though we walk in the flesh, we do not battle against according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but they're mighty in God for pulling down strongholds. You see, we're not dependent on natural abilities. We're not dependent on human methods. We can go out trusting in the Lord, empowered by His Spirit. So that's not by might nor by power, but by my Spirit, says the Lord of hosts. You see, when the Lord called you, when He gave you a vision, when He showed you the cause, when He called you to be a part of it, He knew what you had. He knew who you were. And if you're willing, He can work with whatever you have. If it's just a sling in your hand, because it's His battle, not your battle. It's His battle. And if it's His battle, you don't have to measure your mission based on your ability or your resources. Instead, you go and you identify the Lord's battle, and you go forward in faith, confident in Him, as David did. Look, I want to encourage you today to become part of the Lord's army, to get involved in His battle, to not just acknowledge that there's a battle out there and sit on the hill and wait for somebody else to do something, but to get involved. There are foes to face. And again, it might be very close to home. You might have a foe in your own life. Maybe there's a constant sin struggle in your life that's an opposing foe. Maybe it's something that just mocks you or condemns you. Or maybe it's unforgiveness or bitterness in your heart and you just can't get past it. It's time to stand up and go forward and trust the Lord to give you victory. And if you pay careful attention, you'll see situations where there are foes that need to be vanquished in our community, in our society. You'll look around and you'll see that there is a group of people that nobody's sharing the gospel with them. Nobody's telling them about Jesus. And when you see that, that's the Lord saying, here's an opportunity. Here's a foe that needs to be vanquished. You may see injustice. You may see something in society that isn't right. You may see a situation where it looks like the enemy's winning. And that's an opportunity for you to take up the cause and to get involved, to stand for the truth, to stand for the Lord. I don't want to be too specific because I believe that the Lord will give each of you a vision, a part to play, a Goliath to face. We don't all see things the same way. God uses us in our diversity. And you might even walk into a situation and say, well, isn't anybody going to do something about this? Is there not a cause? And that's because the Lord's shown you there's something He wants you to get involved in. And it's going to take faith. It's going to take faith. Remember, as we read this story, that as the whole thing began, Saul, the Israelites, David, the Philistines, Goliath himself didn't have the whole chapter. They didn't know how it would work out. David went forward not knowing. You don't know how it's going to work out. Sometimes you have to start walking down into the valley to pick up the stones. Look, I believe there are things that mock us daily that we've just come to accept, that are actually enemies that can be defeated. Things that we've just gotten used to in our culture and our society that we've just come to accept, which are actually enemies that can be defeated. If we're in the Lord's army, we're on His side, which means we draw on His resources, on His life, on His wisdom, on His ability, and we're doing it for His glory. So don't be dissuaded, and don't condemn others for not getting involved with what you're involved with. David didn't do that. Instead, step out in faith. Step out in faith. And your step of faith will inspire others to get involved. Trust that He is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all we ask or imagine. Trust in His ability and His love. And when the Lord uses you, people say, I want to get involved. I want to be a part.
David's fight with Goliath teaches us that no battle is too big if the Lord's on our side. And we pray that you've been encouraged today to step out by faith, trusting the Lord and being an example to others. This has been the message, A God Cause, from 1 Samuel 17. If this message has ministered to you, be sure to check out Pastor Doug's entire teaching archive on the Calvary Chapel of Delta mobile app. Just go to your app store and search for CC Delta to download it today. Thanks for joining us for this edition of Learn the Word.